These are the most hated and controversial referees in wrestling, starting with AEW's own Aubrey Edwards. Before she entered the world of wrestling, Aubrey spent 22 years doing classical ballet, and the theatrics from her ballet days carried over to the wrestling ring. She started out on the indie scene under the ring name Earl Hebner, a deliberate play on Earl Hebner's name. In 2018, WWE noticed her and brought her in for the Mae Young Classic. She was also seen in the crowd crying during Daniel Bryan's retirement speech in 2016. However, her big break came in August 2019, when she refereed the AEW World Championship match between Chris Jericho and Hangman Adam Page. That moment was genuinely historic, and that's exactly where the debate starts. From day one, Aubrey Edwards was not content to be invisible. Her facial expressions, her body language, and her dramatic reactions sometimes stole the spotlight from the wrestlers. In 2023, she stepped into the ring herself, winning a trios match alongside the Briscoes against Jeff and Karen Jarrett's faction. The fans who love her say she brings personality and presence to a role that usually disappears into the background. The fans who can't stand her say that's exactly the problem. The criticism boils down to one thing: referees are supposed to make the wrestlers look good, not themselves. When a first-time wrestling viewer watches an AEW match, and the thing that stands out most isn't the wrestlers, it's the referee, something has gone wrong. She's addressed the backlash directly, saying the character work evolved organically because wrestlers started asking her to interact during matches, and when Jericho shoves you, you shove back, because that's what he wanted. However, Aubrey's not the worst referee AEW has ever put on television. That distinction belongs to Rick Knox. If Aubrey Edwards is hated for doing too much, Rick Knox is hated for doing almost nothing. Knox has been refereeing since 2003, built his reputation on the Southern California indie scene, and became a fixture in PWG. The Young Bucks were regulars in PWG during that period, and Knox was their guy. He even had a memorable running gag in Being the Elite, the Bucks' YouTube series, where it was jokingly implied that Knox had been paid off to favor the Elite in matches. It was funny, it was a bit. The problem is that when AEW launched in 2019 and the Young Bucks became EVPs of the company, Knox came with them. And the joke stopped being a joke. Knox has refereed more Young Bucks and Elite matches than almost any other official. And in those matches, the pattern that started as a comedic YouTube bit became a real problem on national television. Heels pile 4 or 5 men into the ring for extended beatdowns while Knox stands at an odd angle, doing nothing. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. At Grand Slam, Knox was officiating the International Championship match between Jon Moxley and Rey Fenix. Fenix hit the Phoenix Driver on Mox, Knox counted to 2 and stopped. Moxley, who had sustained a concussion during the match and was trying to signal for it to end, couldn't kick out because he was barely conscious. But Knox froze. Rather than counting to 3 and ending it, Knox held at 2, meaning the already hurt Moxley had to take a second piledriver before Knox finally ended the match. It was not just a bad call. It was a potentially dangerous one. A referee's most important job, more than counting pinfalls and enforcing rules, is protecting the people inside the ring. In that moment, Knox failed at doing that. His defenders will tell you that it was a one-time accident, but Knox has been involved in various other similar situations that raised questions about his situational awareness. Here's the thing about Earl Hebner. For nearly 2 decades, he was the best referee in the world. He started refereeing in 1977. By 1988, he was working for the WWF, and he was immediately in the middle of major television moments, most infamously the infamous Evil Twin angle at the main event in February 1988, where he and his identical twin brother Dave switched places to help Andre the Giant pin Hulk Hogan for the WWF Championship. After that, he refereed WrestleMania main events and was the senior official in the company for the better part of 17 years. But then came Montreal, November 9th, 1997, Survivor Series. Bret Hart was defending the WWF Championship against Shawn Michaels. What happened next is the most controversial ending in the history of professional wrestling. Bret had agreed to lose the title, just not in Canada, and not to Shawn Michaels. Vince McMahon, paranoid that Hart would show up on WCW Nitro with the WWF belt, decided to take matters into his own hands. He pulled together Michaels, Triple H, and Earl Hebner, and hatched a plan. Hart had specifically requested Hebner as his referee that night. The two were close friends, and Hart trusted him completely. The night before the show, Hart reportedly asked Hebner point-blank if he'd ever double-cross him. Hebner swore on his children he wouldn't. Michaels told Hebner of the plan only that evening, as the show was getting underway. When Michaels got Hart in the sharpshooter, Hart's own finishing hold, Hebner called for the bell even though Hart hadn't tapped. The bell rang, and Michaels was declared the new WWF champion, Hart destroyed television monitors and WWE equipment before spitting directly in Vince McMahon's face. Backstage, he punched McMahon so hard McMahon needed medical attention. Hebner sprinted to his car. His brother Dave had everything packed and the engine running, and they were out of the building before most people had processed what they'd just witnessed. He stayed in WWE until 2005, when he was fired, not over Montreal, but for selling WWE merchandise without the company's permission. He then went to TNA, where he got involved in various storylines and other controversies. He has since claimed to have buried the hatchet with Bret Hart, and Hart has largely confirmed this. Most people know Teddy Long as the beloved SmackDown general manager from the mid-2000s. What a lot of younger fans don't know is that before he became SmackDown GM, Teddy Long had already been thrown out of one wrestling organization for cheating. Long started in the business as an errand boy, literally running errands for Tommy Rich and Abdullah the Butcher, before working his way up to the ring crew and eventually becoming a referee for Jim Crockett Promotions in the NWA in 1985. At the Chi-Town Rumble in 1989, Long ran in and counted the pin that made Ricky Steamboat the NWA World Heavyweight Champion. At the Clash of the Champions a few weeks later, he made a blatant fast count to help Mike Rotunda and Steve Williams beat the Road Warriors for the NWA World Tag Team Championship. The NWA relieved him of his refereeing duties immediately. Long was fired on screen for being a corrupt official and transitioned into a manager. He was the original crooked ref. He eventually landed in WWE in 1998 and served as a referee during the Attitude Era. By 2003, WWE transitioned him back to a management role. And in 2004, he became the first African-American general manager in WWE history, taking over SmackDown after Kurt Angle was fired from the position. For years, Teddy remained a babyface and was loved by the fans. But in 2009, he got caught up in a controversial storyline. The Breaking Point conspiracy involving CM Punk, referee Scott Armstrong, and Long himself, in which they orchestrated a Montreal-style screwjob against The Undertaker. WWE released him in June 2014. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2017, and while Teddy was a beloved GM, his run as a referee was filled with controversies. But compared to what's coming next on this list, Teddy is practically squeaky clean. Because the next referee didn't just bend the rules, he helped rewrite them in the most controversial way possible. Scott Armstrong practically grew up in the wrestling business. His father is the legendary Bullet Bob Armstrong. His brothers Brad, Steve, and Brian all became professional wrestlers. Armstrong himself started in the ring in 1983, working Georgia and Alabama territories and eventually landing in WCW, where he teamed with his brother Steve as the James Boys. He was a decent technician, but when WCW collapsed in 2001, he found himself out of a job, literally working at a furniture store when Umaga walked in, recognized him, and offered to get him a tryout with WWE. Scott went from furniture sales to main event referee in a single conversation. He joined WWE in 2006, starting as an ECW official and working his way up to refereeing WrestleMania main events. By the late 2000s, he was one of WWE's most trusted officials, calling the biggest matches on the card. For years, he was simply the guy you put in the ring when the stakes were highest. And then WWE discovered he was even more useful as a villain. The first time was Breaking Point 2009, as we discussed while talking about Teddy Long. But the second Authority run, starting in 2013, is what really put Armstrong on the map as a heat magnet. At Night of Champions 2013, Armstrong refereed the WWE Championship match between Daniel Bryan and Randy Orton. Bryan hit his running knee and got the cover. Armstrong counted a fast count, and that was used as justification to force Bryan to vacate the title. Armstrong was kayfabe fired, except he wasn't really fired because he kept showing up. At Battleground, at WrestleMania 30, where the Authority tried to plant him as their insurance policy to screw Bryan out of the championship, only for Bryan to overcome the odds. At Survivor Series that same year, Triple H sent Armstrong down to replace a knocked-out referee, and he was immediately flattened by the debuting Sting. Armstrong became the Authority's personal handyman in stripes, and he was good at it. He later admitted in interviews that he had a brief release from WWE in 2010 after becoming, in his own words, a nuisance, running his mouth backstage, acting like he was untouchable. He came back at the bottom of the pay scale and had to earn his way back up. WWE released him in January 2022 after 15 years, and he holds no grudges. Armstrong was never hated for being bad at the job. He was hated for being an effective heel. There's a difference between being bad and being good at playing bad. And nobody understood that difference better than the next man on this list. Most people who become wrestling referees do it because they love the sport and can't quite make it as a wrestler. Brad Maddox was a wrestler who was forced into a referee uniform. Maddox spent 4 years in OVW and then FCW, winning championships and doing everything the company asked. But WWE kept him off the main roster, and by mid-2012, the company had a different plan for him. Raw was expanding to 3 hours and needed more officials. They put Brad Maddox in stripes. He thought the referee role was a bridge to a wrestling career, not the destination. What he didn't know at the time was that his career was about to take a wild turn. On October 28, 2012, at Hell in a Cell, CM Punk was defending the WWE Championship against Ryback. As Ryback was about to put Punk away, Maddox stepped in front of him and hit Ryback with a low blow and helped Punk win. From there, he fought his way into a story with The Shield, then leveraged that into becoming the assistant Raw managing supervisor under Vicky Guerrero, and eventually into the general manager of Raw. His time as GM coincided with the beginning of the Authority angle. He was kayfabe fired by Stephanie McMahon in 2014 and then disappeared from television almost completely. Then, in November 2015, during a dark match at a SmackDown taping in Indianapolis, Maddox grabbed the microphone and got released for calling the crowd cocky pricks. He did some indie work afterward and eventually moved into acting. Brad Maddox's WWE career is the story of a man who was handed a ref shirt when he wanted a spotlight, found the spotlight anyway, and then lost everything because of 2 words. Whether you loved him or hated him, he made the most out of what he was given, even if it made him hated. Here's something rare in professional wrestling: a referee who was genuinely hated on screen and genuinely respected behind the scenes. Charles Robinson grew up in North Carolina with 2 obsessions: Ric Flair and wrestling referees. Not the wrestlers, the referees. As a kid watching NWA television, he studied Tommy Young the way other kids studied Ric Flair's matches. He was in his 30s before wrestling found him. He started on the indies and spent years mailing tapes to WCW and pestering producer Terry Taylor for a job. Then one night in Charlotte in September 1997, Taylor walked up and asked if he had his bag. Thankfully he did, and he got the job that night. By 1999, Robinson had been assigned to referee Ric Flair's matches, the person he'd idolized his entire life. Flair was the storyline president of WCW at the time, and that's when the angle that defined Charles Robinson's career was born. Robinson began overtly favoring Flair and the Four Horsemen in every match he worked. He became the personal referee of the most famous wrestling faction in history. They even gave him a robe and the nickname Lil Nate. Unfortunately, the Lil Nate character ended with a trip to the hospital after Randy Savage hit him with a diving elbow drop. When WCW folded in 2001, Robinson went to WWE as part of the Invasion storyline and spent the next 2 decades becoming one of the most respected officials in the company. He refereed Ric Flair's retirement match at WrestleMania 24. He refereed Shawn Michaels' retirement match at WrestleMania 26. Sting personally requested Robinson for his WWE debut at WrestleMania 31. He also refereed the controversial Undertaker-Brock Lesnar match at SummerSlam 2015. And has been involved in some shady finishes. More recently, John Cena tackled him into another universe when he was running down the ramp at Night of Champions. While Lil Nate was hated during his time in WCW, he's largely redeemed himself, and today he's one of the most respected refs in the WWE. However, the same can't be said about these wrestlers who ruined their careers with one mistake. And if you want to find out what happened to every forgotten WWE wrestler, check out this video next.